The fog rolled thick and heavy through the narrow streets of Blackwood, smothering the faint glow of gas lamps in its damp embrace. Morning had broken, yet darkness persisted, as if the sun itself feared to touch this corner of Victorian England. The cobblestones glistened with moisture, each step upon them producing a hollow echo that reverberated between the close-set buildings. Evelyn Carter paused at the corner of Merchant Street, her gloved fingers clutching the frayed edges of her woolen shawl. The fabric, once a rich burgundy, had faded to the color of dried blood. She drew it tighter against the persistent chill that seemed to seep through layers of clothing to settle in her bones. The cold was different here, not merely an absence of warmth, but something alive and hungry. The distant toll of the church bell vibrated through the fog, counting 7 hollow notes. 7 o'clock. The mill would be opening its iron gates soon, summoning its workers like a beast calling to be fed. Evelyn's breath formed small clouds before her face, dissipating into the greater mist. The smell of coal smoke mingled with the brackish scent of the nearby river and something else, the metallic tang of blood from the butcher's shop, already preparing for the day's commerce. Her boots, worn thin at the soles, offered little protection from the damp seeping up from the ground. Each step sent a shiver of cold through her feet, up her ankles, and into her calves. The sensation reminded her of her place in this world, always touching the ground, never rising above her station. The distant rumble of cartwheels drew her attention. Through the fog emerged the hulking silhouette of the mill overseer's carriage. Evelyn pressed herself against the cold brick wall of the bakery, its rough surface catching at the threads of her shawl. The smell of fresh bread wafted through a crack in the shuttered window, a cruel reminder of luxuries beyond her reach. Her stomach contracted painfully, having known nothing since yesterday's meager portion of watery soup. As the carriage approached, Evelyn lowered her gaze, a reflex born of years of conditioning. The wheels slowed, then stopped. The fog seemed to thicken around her, as if conspiring to hide her from view. But the voice that cut through the mist told her she had not escaped notice. Miss Carter. The words fell like stones into still water. Evelyn raised her eyes, meeting the cold gaze of Marcus Boyd. The mill foreman sat rigid in his seat, leather gloves gripping the reins of his horse with unnecessary force. His beard, meticulously trimmed, framed lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Behind him, the looming silhouette of the mill's chimney stack pierced the fog like a warning finger pointed at heaven. You seem to be taking the long path to your duties this morning. Marcus Boyd's voice carried the artificial warmth of banked coals, heat without light. His eyes, the color of tarnished silver, moved over Evelyn's face with the calculation of a merchant assessing goods. The collar of Evelyn's dress suddenly felt too tight, the worn cotton pressing against her throat like restraining fingers. She swallowed, feeling the movement against the fabric. I was visiting Father at first light, she replied, her voice softer than intended. The words hung in the damp air between them. The doctor says his fever hasn't broken. A muscle twitched in Boyd's jaw. The leather of his gloves creaked as he tightened his grip on the reins. Your father's condition is regrettable, as is his debt. The pause that followed was deliberate, heavy with unspoken meaning. Both matters could be resolved with a single decision, Miss Carter. The fog swirled around them, momentarily obscuring his face before revealing it again, somehow closer though he hadn't moved. A drop of moisture from the bakery's awning fell onto Evelyn's neck, sliding cold and insistent beneath her collar. She suppressed a shudder. I've given you my answer on that matter, Mr. Boyd. Evelyn forced strength into her voice, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a bird seeking escape. Twice now. Boyd's lips curved into what might have been mistaken for a smile had it reached his eyes. "And I have given you time to reconsider. Time is a luxury, Miss Carter, like medicine for your father." Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the sound muffled by the fog. The scent of wet wool and coal smoke hung heavy in Evelyn's nostrils. Her fingers had gone numb where they clutched her shawl. Whether from cold or fear, she couldn't tell. "The Reverend Porter has expressed his willingness to officiate as soon as Sunday next," Boyd continued, his tone suggesting he discussed nothing more consequential than the weather. "A winter wedding has its charms." "Mr. Boyd," Evelyn began, the words sticking in her throat like burrs. "I cannot—" "Cannot?" His interruption sliced through her sentence. "Cannot is not a word for people in your position, Miss Carter. Your father's debts mount. His position at the mill remains unfilled. The charity of Blackwood has limits, as does my patience." The factory whistle pierced the fog, its shriek causing Evelyn to flinch. First call. Workers would be lining up now, showing their papers, filing into the maw of the building, where they would remain until nightfall. "You're expected at your loom," Boyd said, the pretense of warmth evaporating from his tone. "We will continue this discussion later, perhaps with your father present, if his health permits." The threat in his words was unmistakable. He flicked the reins, and the horse moved forward, wheels splashing through a puddle that sent dirty water across the hem of Evelyn's dress. The cold wetness seeped through the fabric, clinging to her ankles like grasping fingers. As Boyd's carriage disappeared into the fog, Evelyn remained pressed against the wall, her heart still racing. The bakery door opened beside her, releasing a gust of warm, yeasty air that made her dizzy with hunger. "Best get on, girl," the baker's wife said, her face creased with a mixture of pity and wariness. "That one doesn't forget slights." Inside the mill, the air hung thick with cotton dust and desperation. The rhythmic clacking of looms created a hellish percussion, punctuated by the occasional shout of a floor manager or cry of a child worker. Evelyn bent over her station, fingers moving automatically through motions performed thousands of times before. The thread slipped through her raw fingertips, leaving tiny smears of blood on the white cotton. Her mind wandered to her father, lying pale and wasted on his thin mattress in their single-room lodging. The consumption had taken hold of his lungs months ago, transforming his once robust frame into a hollow shell that rattled with each labored breath. The doctor's visits, infrequent and increasingly brief, had ceased to offer hope, only extended suffering. And now Boyd's ultimatum hung over her like the executioner's axe. Marriage to the foreman would secure her father's care and clear his debts. But at what cost? The memory of Boyd's eyes, calculating and cold, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the drafts whistling through the mill's poorly sealed windows. "Mind your work, Carter." The sharp voice of the floor manager cut through her thoughts. That's the second mistake this hour. Evelyn looked down to find she had indeed missed a pass, creating a flaw in the fabric that would mean a deduction from her already meager wages. She bit her lower lip until she tasted copper, forcing back the tears that threatened to blur her vision further. The girl at the next loom, no more than 12 with fingers already gnarled from the work, shot her a sympathetic glance. "He's been watching you since morning bell," she whispered when the manager moved away. "Boyd, I mean, up in his office." She jerked her chin toward the glass-walled room that overlooked the floor. Evelyn didn't need to look up to feel his gaze, heavy as a physical touch. The knowledge of his scrutiny made her skin crawl beneath her sweat-dampened dress. The air in the mill grew more stifling as the day progressed. The windows sealed against the winter cold, trapping the heat of bodies and machinery in a suffocating miasma. By midday break, Evelyn's head pounded with the beginnings of one of her spells, vision swimming, sounds becoming unnaturally sharp, then dull. She stumbled into the yard, gulping the cold air despite the sting it brought to her lungs. The fog had lifted somewhat, revealing a sky the color of tarnished pewter. "Miss Carter." The voice belonged to Reverend Porter, his tall figure emerging from between the coal sheds. His clerical collar gleamed white against the perpetual grime of Blackwood. "I had hoped to find you here." Evelyn's heart sank. The Reverend's presence at the mill could mean only one thing. Boyd was accelerating his plans. "Reverend." She dipped her head in the expected gesture of respect, though respect was the furthest emotion from her heart. Porter had been quick to accept Boyd's generous donations to the church building fund, quick to overlook the foreman's reputation among the mill girls. "I've spoken with your father this morning," Porter said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of one accustomed to delivering both sermons and condolences. "He is greatly concerned for your future." A bitter laugh nearly escaped Evelyn's lips. Her father had been barely conscious when she left him, hardly able to recognize her face, let alone discuss her marital prospects. "How kind of you to visit him," she said instead, the words tasting like ash. "His health prevents him from attending Sunday services." "Indeed." Porter's fingers worried at the worn leather of his Bible. "Mr. Boyd has expressed his intention to ease your father's burdens. A most Christian gesture." The yard bell rang, signaling the end of the brief respite. Workers began shuffling back toward the mill doors, shoulders hunched against the return to labor. Evelyn moved to follow, but Porter's hand on her arm stopped her. "Mr. Boyd requests your presence in his office," he said, his voice lowered, "to discuss the arrangements." The touch of his fingers through her sleeve felt like brands on her skin. Evelyn pulled away, the motion causing her to stumble slightly on the uneven ground. The Reverend's expression hardened, the mask of pastoral concern slipping to reveal something colder beneath. "Refusal would be unwise, Miss Carter," he said. "Consider your father's position. Consider your own." Behind him, Sheriff Dalton appeared at the yard gate, his weathered face impassive beneath his hat brim. Not a coincidence, then. They had planned this moment, this trap closing around her like the jaws of some terrible machine. The office air reeked of pipe smoke and privilege. Boyd stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him as he gazed out over the factory floor through the glass partition. Below, hundreds of workers bent to their tasks, a human machinery as regulated as the looms they operated. "Close the door, Miss Carter." He didn't turn to look at her. The command hung in the air, weighted with authority that expected no defiance. Evelyn remained in the doorway, one foot still in the corridor. Her pulse throbbed visibly at her throat, each beat sending a rush of sound through her ears. The sheriff's heavy tread echoed on the stairs behind her, cutting off retreat. I said, "Close the door." This time Boyd turned, his face set in lines of displeasure that transformed his handsome features into something cruel. "Unless you prefer an audience for our discussion." The choice was no choice at all. Evelyn stepped fully into the office, allowing the door to swing shut behind her. The latch caught with a soft click that sounded to her ears like a prison cell closing. "The Reverend tells me you seem reluctant to accept my proposal." Boyd moved toward his desk, fingers trailing over the polished surface. "I find that difficult to understand, given your circumstances." "My circumstances do not require me to sell myself, Mr. Boyd." The words emerged stronger than Evelyn had expected, fueled by a sudden surge of anger that burned through her fear. Boyd's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of surprise on his otherwise composed face. Sell yourself? Is that how you view marriage, Miss Carter? How very modern. He selected a pen from a silver holder, examining its tip with exaggerated care. Your father takes a more traditional view. He has already given his blessing. My father is delirious with fever, Evelyn said, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. He knows nothing of your proposal. He knows enough. Boyd set the pen down with deliberate precision. He knows his daughter's virtue is her only asset of value, and he knows that asset diminishes with each passing year. Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks, not from shame but from rage. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the edges of her vision darkening as one of her spells threatened to overtake her. She forced herself to breathe, to remain upright. I will not marry you, she said, each word distinct and clear. Not to clear my father's debts, not to secure his position, not for any reason you might offer. The silence that followed was absolute, as if even the noise from the factory floor had been swallowed by the tension in the room. Boyd's face remained still, but something shifted behind his eyes, calculation giving way to something darker. Then perhaps you should consider what you will do instead. He opened a drawer, withdrew a folded document. Your father's debt note, due in full by week's end. The cottage where you reside belongs to the mill, as you know, as does the position that provides your meager income. Evelyn's throat constricted, making speech impossible. The walls of the office seemed to press inward, the air growing thinner with each passing second. Of course, Boyd continued, his tone conversational. There is the matter of the missing funds from last month's payroll, a significant sum. Sheriff Dalton has been most interested in my theory about that disappearance. What? The word escaped as barely more than a whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying that theft is a serious crime, Miss Carter. Boyd refolded the document with meticulous care. One that carries severe penalties, public penalties. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. You wouldn't dare. I would. His smile never reached his eyes. Unless, of course, we reach an understanding about our future together. The door opened behind her. Sheriff Dalton filled the frame, his expression grim beneath his heavy mustache. Mr. Boyd? Is there a problem here? Boyd's gaze remained, fixed on Evelyn's face, watching the play of emotions across her features. Miss Carter was just leaving. She needs time to consider her options. He nodded to the sheriff. Please escort her out. Through the main yard, I think. Make sure everyone sees. The sheriff's hand closed around Evelyn's upper arm, his grip firm enough to bruise. She tried to pull away, but his fingers only tightened. Remove your hand, she demanded, voice rising. I've done nothing wrong. That's not what Mr. Boyd says, Dalton replied, already pulling her toward the door. Says you've been helping yourself to company funds. Says he has proof. He's lying. The words tore from her throat, loud enough to draw attention from workers on the floor below. Faces turned upward, curious and fearful. That's enough, Dalton growled, dragging her into the corridor. Don't make this worse for yourself. But something had broken loose inside Evelyn, some dam of fear and compliance shattered by the sheer injustice of it all. She twisted in the sheriff's grip, bringing her heel down hard on his instep. His grip loosened just enough for her to wrench free. I will not be falsely accused, she shouted, backing away. I will not be forced into marriage with a man who would stoop to such tactics. Workers had begun to gather at the foot of the stairs, drawn by the commotion. Boyd appeared in the office doorway, his face darkening with fury. Arrest her, he commanded. Now! What followed happened with the strange, dreamlike quality of nightmare. The sheriff lunged for her. Evelyn dodged, her back hitting the railing. Wood cracked beneath the impact. For one suspended moment, she felt herself falling, saw the shocked faces of the workers below, heard Boyd's curse. Then hands were grabbing her, rough and insistent. The sheriff's face loomed close, his breath hot against her cheek as he wrenched her arms behind her back. "Public lashing for theft," Boyd announced, his voice carrying across the now silent factory floor. "Let this be a lesson about the consequences of defiance." They dragged her into the yard, where the whipping post stood as a grim reminder of the mill's justice. The fog had returned, wrapping the scene in a ghostly shroud that made the gathering crowd appear as specters. The cold bit through Evelyn's thin dress as they bound her wrists to the post, the rough wood scraping her skin raw. "5 lashes," Boyd's voice came from behind her. "Unless Miss Carter wishes to reconsider my offer." Evelyn pressed her forehead against the post, its surface damp and icy against her feverish skin. "I would rather die," she whispered. The first lash fell across her back, tearing through fabric and flesh with equal ease. Pain exploded along her spine, stealing her breath before she could scream. The second blow followed before she could recover, crossing the first in a burning X of agony. Through the haze of pain, Evelyn became aware of a disturbance in the crowd. Voices raised in alarm. The third lash never fell. "What in God's name?" The sheriff's voice cut off abruptly. Evelyn turned her head, cheek pressed against the rough wood. Through strands of hair plastered to her face with sweat and tears, she glimpsed a figure moving through the crowd. Tall, dressed in black, face obscured by the upturned collar of a greatcoat. The fog seemed to part before him, then close behind, as if he commanded the elements themselves. "Release her." The stranger's voice carried the chill of the grave, soft yet somehow audible above the murmurs of the crowd. "Now." Boyd stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and something else, the first flicker of uncertainty. "Who are you to interfere with mill business? This woman is a thief and—" "I said," the stranger repeated, moving closer with a predator's grace. "Release her." The air around him seemed to darken, the fog thickening until it appeared almost black. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as they backed away, leaving a clear path between the stranger and the whipping post. "Sheriff!" Boyd's voice had risen in pitch. "Arrest this man for interference!" But Dalton made no move to obey. He stood frozen, one hand on his pistol, eyes wide with an emotion Evelyn had never seen on the lawman's face before. Pure, unadulterated fear. The stranger continued his approach, each step deliberate. As he drew nearer, Evelyn caught a glimpse of his face beneath the shadow of his hat, pale as moonlight, with eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. Not human eyes. Not entirely. "Who?" she began, her voice a broken whisper. The stranger paused, those terrible eyes fixing on her face with an intensity that stole what little breath remained in her lungs. For an instant, something like recognition flickered in their depths. "Adrian Hale," he said, the name falling from his lips like a forgotten prayer. "And you, Evelyn Carter, are coming with me." "How do you know my—" Before she could finish, the world exploded into chaos. Boyd lunged forward with a shout. The stranger, Adrian, moved with impossible speed. There was a sound like tearing fabric, a cry cut brutally short, and then Adrian was beside her, his fingers working at her bonds with surprising gentleness. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, though whether to her or to himself, Evelyn couldn't tell. "I've been watching over you for longer than you know." As the ropes fell away, Evelyn's legs buckled beneath her. Adrian caught her before she could fall, one arm supporting her waist while the other hand hovered near but did not touch the bloody welts on her back. His skin, where it brushed against hers, was cool, not with the damp chill of the fog, but with the perfect, motionless cold of marble. "Why would you help me?" Evelyn whispered, darkness threatening at the edges of her vision. "What could I possibly mean to you?" Evelyn finished, her voice fading as consciousness began to slip away from her. Adrian's gaze softened, revealing something ancient and sorrowful beneath the fierce exterior. "More than you could possibly understand. Not yet." Behind them, Boyd lay motionless on the ground, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The fog swirled around his prone form, seeming to consume him inch by inch. Adrian gathered Evelyn into his arms with practiced ease, as if she weighed nothing more than autumn leaves. "They'll come looking," he murmured, his breath cool against her fevered skin. "The sheriff, the reverend, all of them. We need to be far from here by dawn." Evelyn wanted to protest, to demand answers, but the pain from her back radiated through her body in relentless waves. Instead, she found herself clinging to this stranger's coat, the fabric smooth and expensive beneath her bloodied fingers. His heartbeat against her ear was strange, too slow, too measured, like the ticking of a clock wound down to its final hours. "My father," she managed to whisper. "They'll blame him for—" "Your father fled 3 nights ago," Adrian said, his stride unnaturally swift as he carried her into the deeper mist. "After he refused to sign the marriage papers, Boyd's men have been searching for him in the neighboring counties." The revelation struck Evelyn like a physical blow. Her father hadn't abandoned her to Boyd's cruelty after all. The relief was so acute it brought fresh tears to her eyes, mingling with the pain and exhaustion. "How could you possibly know that?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Adrian didn't answer immediately. The fog parted before him, as if reluctant to touch his skin, creating a tunnel of swirling gray through which he moved with absolute certainty. No hesitation in his step despite the near blindness of their surroundings. "I know many things about Thornfield and its people," he finally said. "I've watched this town consume itself with greed and superstition for generations." Generations. The word hung between them, laden with implications Evelyn was too weak to unravel. Instead, she focused on the hypnotic rhythm of his movement, the way the mist curled around them like protective arms. Despite the circumstances, despite the blood cooling on her back and the terror of the night's events, she felt a strange security in this man's embrace. The forest grew thicker around them, ancient oaks and twisted pines emerging from the fog like sentinels. The sounds of the town faded, replaced by the whisper of leaves and the occasional hoot of a night owl. Adrian moved through the underbrush without disturbing a single branch, his footfalls impossibly silent on the carpet of decaying leaves. "Where are you taking me?" Evelyn asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "Somewhere they fear to follow." The trees began to thin, and through her half-lidded eyes, Evelyn could make out the looming silhouette of a structure against the night sky. Tall spires and crumbling walls, windows like empty eye sockets staring down at them. Hale Manor, the abandoned estate that had stood empty for nearly a century, the subject of countless whispered tales among the townspeople. No one has lived here since 1783, Adrian finished for her. Not officially, at least. He approached the wrought iron gates that hung askew from rusted hinges. With one hand still supporting Evelyn, he pushed them open, the metal groaning in protest. The overgrown path beyond led to a grand entrance, its double doors weathered but intact. Unlike the rest of the property, they appeared well maintained, the brass handles polished to a soft gleam. Adrian shifted Evelyn in his arms to open one of the doors. It swung inward without a sound, revealing darkness beyond. He stepped inside, and Evelyn felt a change in the air. warmer, drier than she expected from a derelict mansion. As her eyes adjusted, she realized the interior bore little resemblance to the decaying exterior. The entrance hall was clean, illuminated by oil lamps that cast a gentle glow over polished wooden floors and elegant furnishings. No dust, no cobwebs, no sign of the abandonment that the outside world perceived. "You live here," she breathed, understanding dawning through her pain-fogged mind. "For longer than you might believe." Adrian carried her through the hall toward a curving staircase. The town sees what it expects to see. A haunted ruin best avoided. It provides the solitude I require. The staircase led to a long corridor lined with closed doors. Adrian chose one near the end, nudging it open with his shoulder. Inside was a bedchamber that might have belonged in any fine London home. A 4-poster bed with emerald green curtains, a marble fireplace with embers still glowing, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes. With careful movements, Adrian laid Evelyn on her side on the bed, mindful of her injuries. The softness of the mattress after hours bound to the whipping post was so exquisite that a small sob escaped her lips. "I need to tend to your wounds," Adrian said, his voice taking on a clinical tone that couldn't quite mask his underlying concern. The lashes were deep. Evelyn felt a flush of embarrassment through her pain. Her dress was torn open at the back, the fabric stiff with drying blood. "I can't. It isn't proper." A sound escaped Adrian that might have been a laugh, though it held no humor. "Propriety is a luxury we cannot afford tonight. Infection would claim you before morning." He moved to a cabinet across the room, retrieving a basin of water and several clean cloths. When he returned to the bedside, his movements were hesitant, almost reverent. "I will be as gentle as possible," he promised, setting the basin on a nightstand. "But this will hurt." Evelyn nodded, gripping the bedsheets in anticipation. The first touch of the damp cloth against her torn skin sent a jolt of agony down her spine, forcing a gasp through her clenched teeth. Adrian worked methodically, cleaning each lash mark with practiced precision. His fingers never touched her directly, always separated by the cloth. Yet she could feel the unnatural coolness of his skin through the thin fabric. "You've done this before," she observed between pained breaths. Adrian paused momentarily. "I've witnessed more suffering than any soul should bear. Yes, I've tended wounds like these before." "During the war?" Evelyn asked, trying to distract herself from the pain. Another pause, longer this time. "Which one?" The strange response hung in the air between them. Before Evelyn could question it, Adrian resumed his ministrations, applying a salve that smelled of herbs and something metallic she couldn't identify. The pain began to recede almost immediately, replaced by a cooling numbness that spread across her back. "This will help with healing," he explained, "though you'll carry the scars." "Scars are the least of my concerns," Evelyn murmured. The relief from pain was making her drowsy, her thoughts becoming disconnected. "They'll hang me for witchcraft if they find me. That's what Reverend Porter promised." Adrian's hands stilled. Porter has always been too eager with his accusations. 3 centuries ago, he would have thrived during the witch trials. 3 centuries? Evelyn repeated, confused by his odd phrasing. "Men like him," Adrian clarified, though something in his tone suggested he'd said more than he intended. "Men of his temperament have always existed." He finished bandaging her back with strips of clean linen, then moved away to wash his hands in a separate basin. Evelyn watched him through half-closed eyes, noting how he avoided his own reflection in the mirror above the washstand. When he turned back toward her, she caught a glimpse of something dark staining the water behind him. "You're injured," she said, struggling to push herself up on one elbow. Adrian glanced down at his unmarked hands. No. But the water. Rest, he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. We can speak more when you've regained your strength. He moved to leave, but Evelyn reached out, catching the edge of his coat. Please, she whispered, don't leave me alone. Not yet. Something flickered in his eyes. Hunger, perhaps, or longing, before he mastered it. After a moment's hesitation, he lowered himself into a chair beside the bed, his posture rigid despite the comfortable furnishing. I'll stay until you sleep, he conceded. Evelyn studied him in the lamplight, taking in details she'd missed before. His skin wasn't merely pale, but had an almost translucent quality, like fine porcelain. His eyes, which she'd first thought were simply dark, revealed themselves to be a deep burgundy, the color of aged wine. His clothing was impeccable but cut in a style that had been fashionable perhaps 20 years earlier. Why did you save me? She asked, fighting against the pull of exhaustion. How did you know my name? Adrian's expression remained carefully neutral. Your reputation precedes you, Miss Carter. The educated daughter who returned from London only to reject every suitable match. The woman who dared question Reverend Porter's sermons on female obedience. That hardly explains why you would risk yourself to rescue me. Perhaps I recognized a kindred spirit, he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. Someone else who doesn't belong. Evelyn wanted to press further, but the salve was working its way through her system, pulling her toward unconsciousness. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Adrian's face, a study in controlled yearning as he watched over her. Morning came as a gentle awakening, sunlight filtering through heavy curtains that had been partially drawn. Evelyn blinked, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night rushed back. The whipping post, Boyd's cruelty, the strange rescue. Adrian. She pushed herself up carefully, surprised to find the movement caused only a dull ache rather than the searing pain she'd expected. The bandages around her torso felt secure but not constrictive. On a chair near the bed lay a folded dress of deep blue cotton, simple but clean and whole, unlike her torn and bloodied garment. With cautious movements, Evelyn managed to change, though the process left her breathless and trembling. The dress fit reasonably well, if a bit loose at the waist. She wondered about its previous owner, but pushed the thought aside. The bedroom door was unlocked. Evelyn stepped into the corridor, listening for any sound that might indicate Adrian's presence. The house was silent save for the occasional creak of old timber adjusting to the day's warmth. Sunlight streamed through windows that, from the outside, had appeared boarded and broken. The illusion of abandonment was meticulously maintained for external observers. Evelyn made her way downstairs, her hand trailing along the banister for support. The entrance hall looked different in daylight, still elegant but with visible signs of age in the faded wallpaper and worn carpet runners. A clock on the wall showed just past noon. She'd slept far longer than she'd realized. A door to her right stood ajar, revealing what appeared to be a study. Drawn by curiosity, Evelyn entered the room. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with volumes in various languages and states of preservation. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface covered with papers and open books. Behind it hung a portrait in an ornate gold frame, a formal painting of a man in late 18th century attire, his posture aristocratic, his expression severe. Evelyn stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. The subject of the painting was unmistakably Adrian, though dressed in the fashion of a bygone era. The artist had captured the same penetrating gaze, the same proud set of the jaw. Beneath the portrait, a small brass plaque read, Lord Adrian Hale, 1783. That was the last time I allowed my portrait to be painted. Evelyn whirled around, her heart pounding. Adrian stood in the doorway, his figure cast in shadow despite the daylight behind him. He wore the same clothes as the night before, showing no signs of having rested. "This is impossible," she whispered, looking between the portrait and the man before her. "This would make you over 100 years old at minimum," Adrian finished for her. He stepped into the room, though he kept his distance. "The impossible often merely awaits proper explanation, Miss Carter." Evelyn's mind raced through the possibilities, through the stories whispered among the townspeople. Tales of the Hale family and their mysterious disappearance, of lights sometimes seen in the abandoned manor, of livestock found drained of blood in the surrounding fields. "What are you?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Adrian's lips curved in a humorless smile. "I think you've already formed a theory. I don't believe in fairy tales. Yet here you stand, in the home of a man born in 1740, wearing a dress that belonged to a woman who died in 1862. He gestured to her attire. "Elizabeth was a housemaid who showed me kindness when others showed fear. The dress was among her possessions I couldn't bring myself to discard." Evelyn's fingers brushed against the fabric, now feeling its history beneath her touch. "You're asking me to believe you're some manner of immortal creature." "I'm asking you to trust the evidence of your own senses," Adrian countered. He moved to the window, careful to stay within the shadow cast by the heavy curtain. "My absence of heartbeat, my aversion to direct sunlight, the unnatural coolness of my skin." As if to demonstrate, he extended his hand into a patch of sunlight that fell across the desk. His skin began to smoke almost immediately, a sizzling sound, accompanying the acrid smell of burning flesh. He withdrew his hand with a controlled wince, the reddened skin already beginning to heal before Evelyn's astonished eyes. "Vampire," she breathed, the word falling from her lips, like a stone into still water. Adrian inclined his head in acknowledgement. "An old-fashioned term, but accurate in essentials." Evelyn's legs suddenly felt unable to support her weight. She sank into a nearby chair, her mind struggling to reconcile her rational education with the evidence before her. "You drink blood." "I survive on it," he corrected gently. "Just as you survive on meat and bread. Necessity is not the same as savagery. The livestock around Thornfield sustain me when I cannot travel to larger cities for alternatives." His expression remained carefully neutral. "I have not taken a human life for sustenance in over 50 years, Miss Carter." The implication that he had done so before hung in the air between them. Evelyn should have been terrified, should have been searching for escape. Instead, she found herself filled with a perverse curiosity. Why reveal yourself to me? Why risk exposure after hiding for so long? Adrian's composure faltered for the first time, something raw and vulnerable flashing across his features. "Because I have watched you since you returned to Thornfield. Because I recognized in you something I thought lost to this world. A mind unfettered by superstition, a heart undiminished by cruelty." He moved closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. "And because Boyd and Porter would have seen you destroyed for possessing those very qualities I admire." Evelyn studied him, this impossible man who had saved her from certain death. "You said I meant something to you. Last night, when you rescued me." Adrian's gaze dropped to the floor, an oddly human gesture of discomfort. "I spoke hastily, overwhelmed by circumstances." "You're lying," Evelyn said, surprising herself with her boldness. "There's more you aren't telling me." Before Adrian could respond, a sound from outside the house captured their attention. the distant but unmistakable baying of hounds. His expression hardened instantly, the vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of cold calculation. "They've tracked us sooner than I anticipated," he said, moving to the window with preternatural speed. Boyd must have regained consciousness and raised the alarm. Evelyn joined him at the window, careful to stay within the shadows. In the distance, at the edge of the property, she could make out moving figures emerging from the tree line. Men with rifles, accompanied by hunting dogs, straining at their leashes. "Sheriff Dalton," she identified, recognizing the lead figure. "And that's Reverend Porter beside him. They've brought half the town with them." Adrian's jaw tightened. "The good Reverend has been trying to locate this house for years. He suspects what I am, though he clothes his suspicions in religious fervor." "They'll kill you," Evelyn said, the realization striking her with unexpected force. "And they'll drag me back for public execution. Neither of those outcomes is acceptable." Adrian turned from the window, his movements becoming swift and purposeful. "There's a network of caves beneath the eastern woods, connected to tunnels that run beneath this house. We can use them to escape." "Caves?" Evelyn followed him as he strode from the study toward the back of the house. "How far do they extend?" "Far enough to emerge beyond Thornfield's boundaries," Adrian replied, leading her to what appeared to be a pantry. He pressed against a section of wall, revealing a hidden door. "I've maintained several such escape routes over the centuries, old habits from less tolerant times." The narrow passage beyond the door descended steeply into darkness. Adrian retrieved an oil lamp from a shelf, lighting it with practiced efficiency. The flame cast long shadows across his face, emphasizing the inhuman angles of his features. "Stay close," he instructed, offering his free hand to help her navigate the uneven steps. Evelyn hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His skin was cool and smooth as marble, the grip gentle yet secure. Together they descended into the earth, the sounds of the hunting party growing fainter above them. The passage opened into a larger tunnel, its walls reinforced with ancient timbers. The air was cool but not damp, suggesting some form of ventilation. Adrian moved with absolute confidence through the darkness, the lamplight illuminating just enough of their path to prevent stumbling. "These tunnels were originally built during the English Civil War," he explained, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "The Hale family of that era were royalists hiding from Cromwell's forces. I expanded them over the years." "How long have you lived in the manor?" Evelyn asked, trying to distract herself from the oppressive darkness surrounding them. "I was born there in 1740, as the last legitimate Hale heir," Adrian replied. "I left to fight in the colonies during their revolution. When I returned in 1783, I was changed. My transformation occurred in a field hospital outside Yorktown." Evelyn tried to imagine it, surviving a war only to face an even more profound battle for one's humanity. "Who changed you?" "A French doctor who had been practicing his particular form of immortality for centuries. He believed he was being merciful, saving a dying soldier." Adrian's voice took on a distant quality. "He didn't stay to teach me control, that I had to learn through painful experience." The tunnel began to slope upward, branching in several directions. Adrian chose a path without hesitation, guiding Evelyn around a particularly treacherous section where the floor had partially collapsed. "The eastern caves are just ahead," he said. "From there we can—" A sudden rumble interrupted him, the ground beneath their feet trembling. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling. Adrian pulled Evelyn against him protectively, shielding her with his body as a larger section of the tunnel behind them collapsed with a deafening crash. When the dust settled, they found themselves cut off from the way they had come. Adrian raised the lamp, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. "They've found one of the tunnel entrances," he concluded. "Likely blasted it open with black powder." "Can they follow us?" Evelyn asked, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "Not through that collapse, but there are other ways into this network." Adrian urged her forward. "We need to reach the caves before they locate another entrance." They moved faster now, the pretense of normal human limitations abandoned in the face of urgency. Adrian's supernatural speed was tempered only by Evelyn's mortal constraints and the need to keep the lamp from extinguishing. The tunnel widened gradually, the man-made walls giving way to natural limestone formations. The caves, when they finally reached them, were breathtaking despite the circumstances. Vast chambers stretched into darkness, stalactites hanging like stone daggers from ceilings lost in shadow. A small underground stream cut through the rock, its water crystal clear and ice cold. Adrian led Evelyn to a flat stone beside the water, gesturing for her to rest. "We should be safe here momentarily. The cave system is extensive and confusing to those unfamiliar with it." Evelyn sank down gratefully, her back beginning to ache again from the exertion. "What happens when we reach the other side? Where can we possibly go that Boyd and Porter won't eventually find us?" "I have connections in London," Adrian said, setting the lamp on a nearby rock. "People who owe me favors accumulated over lifetimes. They can help establish new identities, passage to the continent if necessary." "You would leave your home? After all these years?" Adrian's expression softened as he looked at her. "Homes can be rebuilt, Miss Carter. Some things are irreplaceable." The way he said it, the weight of centuries in his voice, made Evelyn's heart beat faster. She stood, drawn to him by a force she couldn't name. "You still haven't told me the truth. About why you saved me. About what I mean to you." Adrian seemed to wage an internal battle, his composure cracking to reveal something ancient and vulnerable beneath. Finally, he reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. "This belonged to Margaret Carter," he said, offering it to Evelyn. "Your great-grandmother." Evelyn accepted the journal with trembling hands. "How did you come to possess this?" Margaret was unusual for her time, educated, outspoken, curious about the world beyond Thornfield. Adrian's voice grew softer. Much like her great-granddaughter, understanding began to dawn. "You knew her." "I loved her," Adrian corrected, the admission seeming to cost him greatly. "She discovered what I was, just as you have. But instead of fear, she showed me compassion when I had forgotten what it meant to be human." Evelyn opened the journal, finding pages filled with a flowing feminine script. Entries dated from 1825 described meetings with a mysterious gentleman who visited only after sunset. Philosophical discussions that lasted until dawn, a gradual realization of his true nature. "She writes of you with such tenderness," Evelyn murmured, turning the delicate pages. "We had 2 years together," Adrian said. 2 years of borrowed time before consumption claimed her. I could have transformed her. She asked me to near the end. But I couldn't bear to curse her with this half-existence. Evelyn looked up from the journal. "And that's why you watched over her family, over me." Adrian nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I made her a promise as she died, that I would ensure her bloodline continued, that her descendants would be protected. For 2 generations, that meant observing from a distance, occasional anonymous interventions when needed. Until me," Evelyn said softly. "Until you returned from London last spring," Adrian agreed. "And I saw her again, her spirit, her defiance living in you. When I heard what Boyd and Porter planned, I could not stand aside. The confession hung between them, fraught with implications spanning centuries. Before Evelyn could respond, a distant sound echoed through the caves. Voices, the scrape of boots on stone, the renewed baying of hounds that had picked up their scent. "They've found another entrance," Adrian said, instantly alert. "We need to move. Now." He extinguished the lamp, plunging them into darkness broken only by the faintest suggestion of light from some distant opening. Taking Evelyn's hand, he guided her forward with the sure-footedness of a predator accustomed to hunting in darkness. "The eastern exit is less than half a mile ahead," he whispered. "If we can reach it before they cut us off—" A gunshot cracked through the cave, the bullet ricocheting off stone uncomfortably close to their position. More voices echoed behind them, accompanied by the bobbing glow of approaching lanterns. "There they are!" Sheriff Dalton's voice called out. "I can see movement ahead." Adrian pulled Evelyn behind a large stalagmite formation, his body tense as a coiled spring. "They're between us and the exit," he murmured. "We'll need to find another way." "Is there another way?" Evelyn asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give away their position. Adrian's silence was answer enough. After a moment, he spoke with grim resolution. "I can create a distraction, draw them away long enough for you to reach the exit. And leave you to face them alone? They'll kill you." "They can try," Adrian said, a hint of his inhuman nature bleeding into his voice. "I've survived worse odds." Evelyn gripped his arm. "I won't leave you." Margaret said the same once. His smile was visible even in the near darkness, sad and tender. "You truly are her blood." Before Evelyn could protest further, the unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked echoed from directly behind them. A lantern raised, illuminating their hiding place with harsh yellow light. "Well, well," came Marcus Boyd's voice, thick with malice. "The witch and her demon lover cornered at last." Adrian moved with blinding speed, placing himself between Evelyn and the rifle. Boyd's finger tightened on the trigger, his face contorted with hatred and fear. "No!" Evelyn cried, lunging forward. The cave exploded with the deafening report of the rifle, the sound reverberating off stone walls like a physical force. For one terrible moment, time seemed to stop, and then a sickening thud as the bullet found its mark. Adrian staggered backward, his face a mask of surprise. The lantern light caught the dark stain spreading across his white shirt. Evelyn's scream tore through the cave, raw and primal. "Adrian!" She caught him as he fell, her arms straining under his weight. His eyes met hers, pupils dilating in shock. Marcus Boyd stepped forward, rifle still smoking. "Stand aside, Evelyn. The creature dies tonight." "He's a man," she cried, cradling Adrian's head. "A good man who's done nothing but protect me." "Look at him," Boyd sneered, gesturing with the rifle. "Look at how he doesn't bleed like a man." Evelyn glanced down. The wound in Adrian's chest was a dark hole, but instead of flowing red, the blood seemed thick, almost black in the lantern light, and it moved sluggishly, as if reluctant to leave his body. "I don't care what he is," she whispered, then louder. "I don't care." Adrian's hand found hers, squeezing with surprising strength. "Run," he mouthed. Boyd laughed, the sound echoing off the cave walls. "Where would she run? My men guard every exit. The sheriff is with them. A proper manhunt for a monster and his witch." From deeper in the cave came the sound of approaching footsteps and voices. The hunting party was closing in. "You've nowhere to go," Boyd said, lowering his rifle slightly. "Come with me now, Evelyn. I'll tell them you were bewitched, held against your will. The wedding can still happen tomorrow." Adrian's body tensed beneath her hands. His eyes, now alert despite the wound, darted to the shadows behind Boyd. Evelyn followed his gaze and saw nothing at first, then a subtle movement, a deeper darkness within the darkness. "I would rather die in these caves," she said, voice steady despite her terror. Boyd's face hardened. That can be arranged. But first, he raised the rifle again, aiming at Adrian's head. I'll finish what I started. The darkness behind Boyd surged forward. A massive bat-like shape detached from the shadows, followed by another and another. Boyd turned too late. The creatures descended upon him in a flurry of leathery wings and inhuman shrieks. His scream was cut short as he was lifted bodily from the ground, the rifle clattering uselessly to the stone floor. My children, Adrian whispered, a pained smile crossing his lips. They've come. The cave erupted into chaos. Lantern light caught glimpses of Boyd being carried deeper into the darkness, his terrified cries fading. More shapes swooped through the cave, heading toward the approaching hunting party. Distant shouts of alarm echoed back to them. Can you stand? Evelyn asked, helping Adrian to sit upright. He nodded grimly. The bullet passed through. I'll heal, but I need... He trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Blood, she said simply. You need blood. Their eyes met in the dim light. No secrets between them now. Not yours, he said firmly. Never yours. We need to move, Evelyn said, helping him to his feet. Which way? Adrian leaned heavily against her, his breathing labored. There's another exit. My kind have used these caves for centuries. Follow the left wall. They moved slowly, Adrian's arm draped over her shoulders. Behind them, the sounds of struggle continued. Men shouting, unnatural screeches, the occasional gunshot. The darkness ahead seemed impenetrable. Your children, Evelyn ventured. Will they kill those men? Adrian shook his head. They obey my will. Fear, not death, is their purpose tonight. They continued in silence, the cave narrowing until they had to walk single file. Evelyn leading with one hand on the damp stone wall, the other holding Adrian's cold fingers. The darkness was absolute now, their progress guided only by touch. There, Adrian finally whispered, his voice strained. Feel the air moving? We're close. Evelyn paused, sensing the subtle current against her face. The air smelled different here, earthy and damp, but with a hint of night-blooming flowers. Freedom waited ahead. The passage widened suddenly, opening into a small chamber. Moonlight filtered through a narrow fissure in the ceiling, revealing a natural stone staircase leading upward. Adrian stumbled, nearly falling. Just a little further, Evelyn encouraged, though she could see how pale he'd become, his skin almost translucent in the moonlight. I can't, he said, slumping against the wall. You go. They'll be searching for me, not you. If you reach Blackwood Manor, Margaret's old room, there's a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Papers, money, enough to start anew somewhere. I'm not leaving you, Evelyn insisted. Not after everything. Evelyn. His voice hardened. Look at me. Really look. In the silver moonlight, she saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. His skin had an unnatural pallor, and his eyes reflected the light like a predator's. The wound in his chest had stopped bleeding entirely, the edges already knitting together with unnatural speed. I am not a man, he said quietly. What Boyd called me, monster, demon, perhaps he wasn't wrong. Evelyn knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. My father called me possessed when I refused to marry Boyd. Reverend Porter called me a witch for daring to speak my mind. If you're a monster for protecting me, what does that make them? A sound from the passage behind them. Footsteps, cautious but approaching. The hunters had regrouped. We need to move, Evelyn urged. Together. Adrian's eyes closed briefly, a decision made. When they opened, they held new determination. Together, then. With renewed strength, he pushed himself upright. They ascended the stone staircase, emerging through the fissure into the cool night air. They stood on a wooded hillside, the lights of Blackwood Village visible in the valley below. Above them, the moon hung full and bright, casting long shadows through the trees. "Which way?" Evelyn asked. Adrian pointed away from the village. "There's a hunter's cabin 2 miles north. We can rest there until—" A rifle shot cracked through the night. Splinters flew from the tree beside them. Adrian pulled Evelyn down as more shots followed. "There they are!" Sheriff Dalton's voice carried up the hillside. "Don't let them escape!" "Run!" Adrian commanded, pushing Evelyn ahead of him. They fled through the moonlit forest, branches whipping at their faces. Behind them, shouts and crashing undergrowth marked their pursuers. Adrian moved with supernatural grace despite his wound, but Evelyn could see he was weakening, his movements becoming less fluid. The trees thinned ahead, revealing a steep drop, a quarry edge, its bottom lost in shadow. They skidded to a halt at the precipice. "We're trapped," Evelyn gasped, her breath coming in painful bursts. Adrian surveyed the drop, then the approaching lanterns. "Not trapped, but you must trust me completely." "I do," she said without hesitation. He pulled her close, his arms encircling her. "Hold tight to me. Don't let go, no matter what you see or feel." The first of their pursuers broke through the tree line, Sheriff Dalton followed by 3 men with rifles. Reverend Porter trailed behind, clutching a Bible and a silver cross. "Stop right there," Dalton shouted, raising his weapon. Adrian's arms tightened around Evelyn. "Close your eyes," he whispered. She buried her face against his chest as he stepped backward, into empty air. Evelyn's stomach lurched as they fell. A scream rose in her throat but died as their descent suddenly changed. The sensation of falling transformed into something else, a swooping, gliding motion. Wind rushed past her ears, and beneath her, Adrian's body seemed to shift and expand. She risked opening her eyes. The quarry wall blurred past them, but they weren't falling. They were flying. Adrian's arms had become something else, something impossible. Great wings that caught the air and carried them across the quarry. Shouts of horror echoed from the cliff edge above. A few desperate shots rang out, the bullets falling short. "Hold on," Adrian's voice came, strangely distorted but unmistakably his. They soared over the treetops, the village receding behind them. Evelyn's mind struggled to comprehend what was happening, but her body understood enough to cling tightly to the creature that Adrian had become. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, they descended into a small clearing. As they touched down, Adrian's form rippled and contracted, wings becoming arms once more. He collapsed immediately, his strength finally spent. "Adrian." Evelyn knelt beside him, hands hovering over his too still form. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with effort. "The cabin," he whispered. "Just beyond those trees." She helped him to his feet, bearing most of his weight as they stumbled toward the dark outline of a structure at the clearing's edge. The door swung open at their approach, its hinges well-oiled despite the cabin's weathered appearance. Inside was sparse but clean, a single room with a bed, table, and stone fireplace. Evelyn guided Adrian to the bed, where he sank down with a groan. "Wood by the hearth," he said weakly. "Matches on the mantel." Evelyn worked quickly, building a fire that soon filled the cabin with warm light. She returned to find Adrian attempting to remove his bloodied shirt, his movements clumsy with weakness. "Let me," she said, gently helping him. The wound looked better than she expected. The edges had closed further, leaving a dark, puckered hole that no longer bled. "It needs cleaning," she said, looking around for water. "There's a well out back," Adrian said, "and bandages in that trunk." While fetching water, Evelyn gazed at the night sky. No pursuit yet, but it would come with daylight. She hurried back inside. As she cleaned his wound, Adrian watched her face. "You're not afraid," he observed. "I am," she corrected, "but not of you." "You should be," he said quietly. "What you saw tonight." "I saw you save my life," she interrupted. Again. The wound was strange beneath her fingers, cold to the touch, and the flesh around it seemed to pulse with unnatural life. As she worked, Adrian's breathing slowed, becoming so faint she had to lean close to ensure he still drew breath at all. "You need blood," she said finally, setting aside the cloth. "Don't deny it." Adrian's eyes had darkened, the pupils expanding until almost no iris remained. "If I take blood now, in this state," he swallowed hard, "I might not be able to stop." Evelyn considered this, then deliberately picked up a small knife from the table. "Then I will stop you." Before he could protest, she drew the blade across her palm. Blood welled immediately, bright red in the firelight. "Evelyn, no." Adrian tried to turn away, but his resistance crumbled as the scent reached him. His hand shot out, grasping her wrist with surprising strength. "Trust me," she whispered, echoing his words from earlier. His eyes met hers, hunger warring with something deeper. Then, with infinite care, he brought her bleeding palm to his lips. The sensation was strange, not painful, but intense. Evelyn felt a curious lightheadedness as he drank, his throat working with each swallow, his skin flushed with returning life, the wound on his chest visibly healing before her eyes. When he finally pulled away, it was with obvious effort. He pressed his own palm against her cut, stemming the flow. "Enough," he said, voice stronger now. "Any more would be dangerous." Evelyn swayed slightly, and he guided her to sit beside him on the bed. They remained that way for several minutes, her hand in his, the fire crackling in the hearth. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Adrian's thumb traced circles on her uninjured hand. "They'll hunt us at dawn. The village, the county, perhaps. A monster and his witch." "Then we leave before dawn," Evelyn said simply. "And go where? There's nowhere in England I can hide forever. My kind are few now, hunted to near extinction." Evelyn thought of the papers he'd mentioned, hidden at Blackwood Manor. "America," she said suddenly. "The frontier. Vast spaces where people ask few questions." A smile touched Adrian's lips. "You would leave everything? For a life with what I am?" "What do I have to leave?" she countered. "A father who sold me? A village that feared me? The only person who ever showed me kindness was your Margaret, and she's gone." At Margaret's name, Adrian's expression softened. "She would have liked you, not just for the resemblance." "Tell me about her," Evelyn said, settling closer to him. "The real story." As the night deepened around the cabin, Adrian spoke of Margaret. Not the sanitized version the village remembered, but the fierce, brilliant woman who had discovered his nature and chosen him anyway. How they had planned to leave together, before illness took her too quickly for even his blood to save her. "Her last wish was that I watch over her family," he said. "I've done so for generations, from the shadows, until you." "Why me?" "Because you're like her, unafraid to choose your own path." Outside, the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky. Adrian tensed, sensing the approaching dawn. "We need to move," he said. "I have a carriage hidden half a mile from here. If we reach London, I have contacts, people who can help us book passage to America." They gathered what supplies the cabin offered: food, a lantern, a heavy cloak for Evelyn. As they prepared to leave, Adrian paused by the cabin's single window, staring at his reflection, or rather, the lack of one. The glass showed only Evelyn, standing alone in the room. She came to stand beside him, her reflection reaching out to touch empty air where he should be. "Does it bother you?" he asked quietly, seeing the truth so plainly. Evelyn studied the window, then turned to look directly at him, solid and real before her. "That isn't truth," she said. "It's just glass. This—" She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its slow, steady beat. "This is truth." They left the cabin as the sky lightened further. The forest was quiet around them, birds not yet awakened. Adrian led the way, moving with renewed strength, though he kept their pace measured for her benefit. "Listen," he said suddenly, stopping. In the distance came the baying of hounds. The hunt had begun. "They're still miles away," Adrian reassured her. "We'll reach the carriage first." They pushed on, the terrain growing rougher. As they crested a hill, Evelyn saw smoke rising from multiple points in the forest behind them. "They're burning the woods," she gasped, "trying to flush us out." Adrian's expression darkened. "Humans fear what they don't understand. Fire is their oldest weapon against my kind." The smoke spread quickly, aided by the dry underbrush. They increased their pace, half running now. The carriage was hidden in a thicket ahead, covered with branches and leaves for concealment. As Adrian pulled away the camouflage, the sound of hoofbeats reached them. Riders approaching fast from the east. "Get in," Adrian urged, helping Evelyn into the carriage before taking the driver's seat. The horses, nervous from the smoke, needed little encouragement to bolt forward. The carriage rocked wildly as they sped along the overgrown track. Through the small window, Evelyn could see riders emerging from the tree line behind them, Sheriff Dalton at their head. Gunshots cracked, but they were already pulling away, the superior horses easily outpacing their pursuers. The forest thinned, giving way to open countryside. As they reached the main road, Adrian slowed the horses to a less suspicious pace. The pursuit fell behind, hidden by a bend in the road. "We've lost them for now," Adrian called down, "but they'll alert the neighboring towns." Evelyn leaned out the window. "How far to London?" 2 days hard travel. We'll need to stop eventually. I can continue through daylight, but the horses cannot." They rode in tense silence as the sun rose fully. Evelyn watched Adrian for signs of discomfort in the daylight, but he showed none beyond keeping his hat pulled low and his collar high. By midday, they had passed through 2 villages without incident. At the third, they stopped long enough to water the horses and purchase food. Evelyn handled the transaction while Adrian remained with the carriage, avoiding curious eyes. "The innkeeper was talking about us," she reported as they continued their journey. "The news travels faster than we do. A monster and a kidnapped woman fleeing justice." Adrian's hands tightened on the reins. "Perhaps we should separate. You could claim I forced you, return to—" "No," Evelyn said firmly. "We stay together." As evening approached, they left the main road, following a narrow track to a secluded farmhouse. Adrian approached alone, returning minutes later. "An old acquaintance," he explained. "We can rest here tonight." The farmhouse's occupant was a stooped, elderly woman who greeted Adrian with obvious familiarity. She showed them to a small bedroom, bringing food and fresh water without questions. "Another of your kind?" Evelyn asked when they were alone. Adrian shook his head. "Human. I saved her son from drowning 30 years ago. She's repaid that debt many times over." They ate in companionable silence, the day's tension slowly easing. As night fell completely, Adrian moved to the window, staring out at the darkened countryside. "No pursuit visible," he said, "but they're out there searching." Evelyn joined him, standing, close enough that their arms touched. "We'll reach London tomorrow?" "By nightfall, if we leave at first light." She nodded, then hesitantly asked the question that had been forming all day. In America? How will we live? Will you continue to feed? He finished gently. Yes, I must, but not as you fear. He turned to face her fully. I've survived centuries without taking human life. Animals sustain me for the most part. Occasionally, I take blood from the willing, a small amount, freely given. Like mine, she said, touching the bandage on her palm. Yes, though that was different, more intimate than I usually allow. The word hung between them, intimate. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks. And us? She asked softly. What will we be to each other in this new life? Adrian's hand rose to touch her face, his fingers cool against her skin. Whatever you wish us to be. Companions, certainly. Friends, I hope. His voice lowered. More, perhaps, if you desire it. But I will never presume, never demand. Evelyn leaned into his touch. And if I desire everything? His eyes darkened, but not with hunger, with something deeper, more human. Then everything is yours. She closed the distance between them, her lips finding his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deeper as he responded. His arms encircled her, drawing her against him. When they finally parted, both breathless despite his lack of need for air, Evelyn rested her forehead against his chest. I choose you, she whispered. Monster man, whatever you are, I choose you. Morning came too soon. They departed as planned, the old woman pressing a bundle of food and a small silver cross into Evelyn's hands. For protection, she said with a knowing look at Adrian. The journey to London passed without incident, though they saw wanted posters in every village they passed through, crude drawings of a monstrous figure and a woman with substantial rewards offered. London's sprawl engulfed them as dusk fell, its maze of streets offering anonymity. Adrian navigated with the confidence of long familiarity, eventually stopping before a nondescript building near the docks. Wait here, he said, disappearing inside. He returned minutes later with a thin man in expensive clothes. This is Mr. Harrow. He's arranged our passage to New York. The ship sails with the morning tide. Harrow, clearly another who knew Adrian's nature, provided them with new clothes, papers, and a room for the night in a nearby inn. By morning, Evelyn Carter and Adrian Hale would cease to exist, replaced by Mr. and Mrs. Edward Blackwood, emigrants seeking fortune in the New World. Their room was small but clean, with a view of the Thames and the forest of shipmasts beyond. As night settled fully over London, they stood together at the window, watching the fog roll in from the river. Are you certain? Adrian asked one final time. This is your last chance to turn back. Evelyn took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I've never been more certain of anything. The fog parted briefly, revealing a sliver of moon reflected in the river's dark waters. Tomorrow would bring a new world, new dangers, new possibilities. But tonight, in this room, with this man who was not a man, Evelyn felt something she had never truly known before. Safety. You're safe with me, Adrian whispered, as if reading her thoughts. Always. Evelyn smiled, watching their joined hands silhouetted against the window glass, her reflection holding something invisible, yet undeniably real. The fog closed in again, wrapping the building in its protective embrace, muffling the sounds of the city. In that cocoon of mist and shadow, monster and witch, hunter and hunted, they found what both had sought for so long, not just safety, but belonging. The world outside might never understand, but here in the quiet space between heartbeats, they recognized each other as home.